Hello, and we are back for another edition of our unnamed show.
Unnamed show it is. In this interesting episode, we are going to be talking about goals.
And we're not talking couple goals.
No,
Jay-Z and Beyonce couple goals. No.
Hashtag relationship goals.
Mm-hmm.
No, we are going to be talking about how individual goals, so your personal goals as an individual, how they can affect the relationship overall.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or having,
it's
or
differing goals,
or how individual goals play into collective goals.
That's true. So we've got scenarios that we're going to go through, and then we're going to discuss it. So the first scenario is we're talking about a situation where one person. So let's give an example where in our relationship I have a car, and you might not have a car, right? And you've been saving up. You've been working hard every day, and you finally got enough money to buy yourself a car. But at that time, we are now in a position where we can also use your money plus my money to put down money for a deposit for a house. And you want to buy the car, but then I tell you, hey, it's not a good time because, we need your money to also help out with the house money. How does that go about? Do we scratch the house? What?
Well, I'll be like, this nigga selfish, though. Because I'd be like, yeah, but you've got a car, and I don't. So, are you trying to tell me that my convenience... Like, imagine if it's a situation where you've got a car, and everything's great, and then maybe we don't even work in the same direction. So I have to go on taxis, and I have to deal with getting harassed. I have to deal with being late for work because something happened. And then now you say to me, yeah, about that car, babe. Let's wait.
Well, if we're getting a bigger house.
Yeah, but it'll probably be... So the listing of priorities will still be... Okay, in my book, my thing would be, wouldn't we want to work on convenience in a way, right? If you have the convenience of a car, why would then mean that the other partner can live without that convenience when you get to have that convenience?
But if we get the house, we're both having a very convenient, nice, warm house.
But what if we already live in a nice, warm place?
But if you look at it from if we're already in that position, then this is not a...
No, I mean,
discussion.
fine, renting. Yeah. Let's say you're renting.
But do you want to rent all your life? Yeah?
But then buying the car doesn't mean that you're never going to buy the house.
True. But it's going to take a long amount of time to get back to that position where we have the money.
Yeah, but then I'm like trying to imagine a situation where we buy that house. You buy that house, and then I don't have a car, and each time you just drive into the driveway with your car, I'm like,
there's some resentment.
Is this guy? You know what I mean? And I get it, and I guess, and this is basically the discussion. The discussion is, do you see how each person's viewpoint is very, very valid?
Yeah. On
one hand, one person wants a car, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially if they've been saving up for it and blah, blah, blah. But then on the other hand, the person who wants the house is probably thinking on a more long-term scale. And that doesn't necessarily mean that either one is wrong. It just means that maybe your goals are
not
in conflict. And I guess maybe this is how people end up with irreconcilable differences. But I also don't think so. I think there are ways to come to a solution that works for everyone. So that's the first scenario.
Speaking of which, let's look at the second scenario. Maybe that can shed some light. So I want to advance my career, and I decide I'm going to do an MBA. Once again, there's money involved. And I ask my bae here to help me out with the money for it, and that's the money she had earmarked for a vacation to Greece, Italy.
Right.
Yeah. And she sacrifices that money, and I go do my MBA, but then I fail it. So how do people then go about that? Because
before you
say that, especially if you had said that, hey, this money, it's a one-shot thing. You have to make sure it gets through, because I don't see us going through this.
I think, you know what, I actually think even before we get to failure of the MBA, the greater question is going to be, I wanted to do this with my money. Well, and I guess this is where it becomes complicated, because when you're in a relationship or when you're married or whatever, it's no longer my money, it's now ours. And I guess this is the challenge a lot of people struggle with. But my whole thing is, the challenge that's going to happen here is, because I feel like someone might say, yeah, but a vacation versus an MBA is a vacation is frivolous, right?
Yeah.
So then the question then becomes,
But it's still a goal.
No, it
it's
is.
still something you've worked out, you're hard for.
It is, and the challenge about it is, if let's say I was the one who wanted to go on a vacation and you wanted an MBA, and then you told me that me wanting to go on vacation is frivolous, I would be pissed, because I'll be like, oh, so are you trying to say that your shit is more important than mine?
Yeah.
You see, so then that's the question. But yeah, it's a bit tricky, because I feel like it can be so hard, I guess, to understand the value of it. Actually, where I was going with this was, I think the challenge that most people face is, how do you quantify the immediate gratification of getting a vacation now versus the long-term gratification of someone getting an MBA.
But that's like the car and the house scenario.
Exactly. And I think this is why it's a challenge. The challenge is probably long-term versus short-term, right? And I guess the challenge about it is, and I think this is something I've seen people complain about on Twitter. There's even a whole, story about it. It's actually going to be made into a TV show, a miniseries. And it's the story about this woman, forgot her name today. But so she basically was very smart, very bright, very intelligent.
Oh, it's that woman who took the guy through to law school.
Betty Broderick. There we go.
Yes, that woman, yes.
So she basically decided, or they discussed it, and they were very young in their marriage, and they were very young in their lives, and so he wanted to go to law school. And she was the one who was working steadily. So she put a lot of money into him going to law school, and it worked out. He became a very high achieving attorney, blah 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 blah. But then he left her. No, he didn't cheat. He left her for a younger, hotter girl. So she killed them. And obviously this is an extreme thing, but then this is the other thing that probably goes into people's minds, which is like, okay, fine, if I was to pay for your MBA,
so he compromised what she wanted for his...
Exactly, because you're obviously under the thing of that, long-term goal is he's gonna have a job, he's gonna, but, and it's a funny thing that might happen to you, that she then decided to stay home and raise the kids, and then what ends up happening to you? He'll leave you because he'll be like, you're not on my level anymore. And you're like, but
I had to go on that level so you could be at a different place, or we could be at a different place.
Right. And I think this is the challenge a lot of people have, which is like, okay, fine, if I was to do this, and I don't think it's being cynical. I think it's just, we live in a world where people do things like that. People, not to say they use people, but things like that happen.
Things happen.
Right. And so the question is, when you think of those, because the reason we are probably having a hard time answering this question is, how do you come to a compromise in a relationship so that one person isn't left feeling resentful?
Before we go on to that, another example that takes on from this story that you just gave us for Betty, where I, for instance, have a steady job. It's probably like a average job. It's not giving me much money, but it's okay. It pays the bills and all that. But then I feel like I'm ambitious enough and I want to do startups. And you advise me rightfully that, hey, startups are a bit dicey, they're a bit risky. And if you do that and you don't get the job, it's going to be, full on responsibility on you. But then you help me in any case. I push on and I kind of know it's my dream. You need to be supportive. The usual thing people say. You need to be supportive as my partner. You support me. You put money into it. We put capital into the business. And ultimately, the startup, doesn't start up. So, and then now we're in a dire situation because you had to support me, and now I don't have a job. I left my job to do the startup, and now you're having to take care of two people basically. So those are also situations where, because your goals in that situation would be like for us to have steady income of money and build on that, whereas my goals in that situation is to let's have the startup,
the risk thing.
Let's be risky
take
about
a risk,
it, and make sure we get it
Well,
through.
I feel like I think the person who is expecting the other person to make the bigger sacrifice has to be the more understanding one. So you can't be on some, hey, you don't support my dreams, you don't support my goals. Because I also think a lot of the things that like a lot of people have, and I think we all have this thing where it's like, it doesn't even have to be something like I want to start like a company or whatever. It could be just like I want to buy this thing, and then you go to your partner and you're like, oh, I want to buy this thing, and you know how it is when you are so convinced that you want to buy this thing, and then you're pretty sure that your partner is just going to be like, yeah, cool, and then you go there and then your partner's like, rightfully, but is this a good idea? And then you're like, but you don't support me. And it's like, does support mean blindly following someone and not advising them? Because, and I think this is where I'm going back to my point of, if you're the one who is expecting the bigger sacrifice, like let's say you want me, for example, to give up like 100 grand of our life savings, and maybe it's like bonuses and stuff, and it's taken years for that to happen, to blow it into a startup. I do think that the person who wants the risk to be taken is the one who needs to be more patient.
That's a good.
But usually it doesn't work that way.
But then if we go to our first example, the car and the house, how would you put that into play there? Because who's risking the most?
I don't know.
See, so that's a
I don't know. I think, and
even
I think
the MBA and the vacation one, who's risking the most there?
I think the biggest thing is probably that you have to let go of your ego, because I think that a big challenge that a lot of people have in relationships is kind of being very individualistic. Like one example that comes to mind is this story I saw on Reddit where a guy and a girl posted that her husband is very angry at her because he ended up using up all his savings for their wedding.
Oh yes.
And so
his dad was
so basically what happened was both woman and man's family pledged money for the wedding, towards the wedding, and then the groom's father ended up becoming sick and needing surgery, so they couldn't pay for the wedding anymore. And then the girl's family was also like, well, if they're not going to pay, we're not going to pay. And then at that point the woman was like, but I wanted the wedding of my dreams and I really wanted it to be amazing, blah blah blah. So I asked him to use up his savings, to use up all his money, which he did, and now he resented her. So then the question is, weren't you being self-motivated and egotistical when you, seeing what the situation was and seeing that your partner's also dealing with the situation that he's got a sick parent and you still insisted? That's when it becomes problematic. And I think this is what makes these goals, this is what makes people butt heads so much in these goals situation, because it's kind of like the vacation thing. If I'm like, oh, but I want to go on this vacation, and no, is it really about us anymore? And I think this is why marriage is challenging, because now you are collectively making decisions. You are collectively deciding what's best for both of you. But if you are both self-motivated, then it's not going to work.
True. Thoughts, questions to increase people to think about this. Who gets to decide what's collectively good for the relationship?
Both of you.
Then if you're saying both of you, one has one idea, one is one idea, and if they're totally different, it's not going to be a collective thing.
The whole point is that you have to work to get on the same page.
Which means that someone has to compromise.
Both of you have to compromise. That's the idea.
But is it ever going to be a 50-50 compromise?
No, it won't. But then at the same time, and I guess this is the other challenge about relationships, that if you're with someone for a long time, it probably means there's going to be situations where you're going to take turns compromising.
I think that's like Chris Rock's tambourine, eh?
Yeah.
So when you're a band, basically for those that don't know, if you're in a band, someone plays the guitar, someone's the lead singer, and someone just plays the tambourine.
And sometimes you're going to have to play the tambourine in your relationship. And so the question then becomes...
Are you always playing the tambourine?
Well, no. No, that like...
That's an abusive relationship.
Is it that... Do you want to win and be so right and be so correct in your thing that you're willing, like this woman with the wedding, that are you so willing to have a wedding? And this is why people on Reddit were rightfully roasting her, because she's all, yeah, but I got the wedding. And people are like, so you're trying to tell us that you are willing to lose a marriage for one day of a wedding? And this is the thing where it's like one of the things that I remember Viola Davis and her husband said on the Black Love documentary. Check that out, it's really good. And she was talking about how marriage is, and it sounds dramatic to put it like this, or relationships. I think any serious relationship nowadays, because we've got so many people who don't get married and then they're still in very serious relationships. Right. And so in long-term relationships, you're dying to yourself. You are not about just you anymore. It is now about them. And I think what makes it challenging for most couples, especially if you don't have kids anymore, because when you have kids, there's almost like an automatic answer, which is always that it's what's best for the kids. When you don't have that, it becomes this gray area of who gets their way. And it's interesting because I actually asked someone who's married, and I think they've been married for maybe 5 years. I asked her the other day, and she was like, no, what you actually have to do here is that if, let's say, you want to buy a house.
Yeah.
And you want to buy a house in a year. And I'm like, bruh, no. The situation would have to be that the compromise would probably be, okay, fine, we buy the house, but we buy the house after 3 years, not now.
So we change the timeline.
Yes. So I would call it conditional compromising, where it's like, okay, fine, you want to do your MBA. Do you maybe want to check out websites like Coursera where they offer free courses? Then you can get an idea of what you're getting into, and if you're ready for it. Do you want to maybe talk to a coach to make sure that this is what you want? Are you ready to do the MBA? Blah, blah, blah. And then, okay, let's make the decision.
I see. So I'm getting a sense of people shouldn't be just adamant on what they want immediately with yes, I just want this.
Right.
So let's say for a vacation, instead of just saying I want to go to Greece or Italy,
it's like,
you can say maybe we can go to Mozambique. Yeah, let's go to Mozambique or somewhere here nearby.
These are the things that you then have to do that I think you always, obviously there's issues where you literally cannot maybe find middle ground unless you maybe talk to someone who can help. But I also think, it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't necessarily have to be that one person gets their way immediately. It's, let's sit down, let's see if there are alternatives, or if there is some sort of way where people can get what they want without it being insane. And then that just means that if you're the one who wanted the Greek holiday, you're gonna have to relent and be like, okay, cool, I get where you're coming from, blah blah blah. And so it goes back to swallowing your pride and not having an ego and not taking it and not keeping score, being like, oh yeah, but
last time you got this.
And I think this is the other challenge that has to, that a lot of people face. So I think to conclude, I would say, like, the key thing is being willing to shift, to be flexible. I think with most people, maybe with the car, the agreement can be, okay, let's get a cheaper car.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then we maybe still have money to contribute to the house. So there's always something that you can do, but you kind of have to make the decisions together.
I agree. And I think another point that you've mentioned there, a take home point, is that there has to be some level of openness. Openness in the sense that you're not, it's not etched in stone. Like, you know, your dreams, yes, you can sort of like peg them down a little bit. So it requires a level of selflessness and not having that ego to say, hey, you know, this is what I always wanted. It has to be this way. And if that's there, then I think people can work towards it. Because as long as there's that situation of I want my thing, it's not going to work.
And this is why I don't think you cannot, you have to be in a relationship with an attitude of partnership, not an attitude of, and I see this with a lot of women sometimes, where we have this, you have to serve me, he has to treat me like that, and he can still treat you like a queen and you can treat him like a king, but don't get so caught up, because I also think with our generation, it's also that we also get caught up in appearances. Like, hey guys, I thought I was ready, people were gonna see me in Paris, people are gonna see me in Mexico, and now you're trying to tell me people are gonna see me in Zanzibar. Like, what are you telling me, you know? And it's like, those things should not even be a factor
concern,
at all. And I think for a lot of us, it always reminds me of this line that Drake said on Emotionless, where he's like, I know a girl who's happily married till she puts down her phone. And that's our generation, where we are willing to maybe be more like a little selfish, and then still be like, oh yeah, but babe, or blah blah blah. Meanwhile, there's resentment in the background, and so you just can't get into a relationship and not be willing